And webinar is started. And I see participants are dropping in. So hello everyone. We will wait 1 or 2 minutes for people to join, and welcome to our webinar and office hours. Yeah, hi everyone. We are waiting for people to join. Maybe in 1 minute we will start our session. People are still joining. Wait another 20 seconds. Yep. Okay, I think we can kick off this call. Yeah, hello everyone, and welcome to our Dynatrace Office Hours. In this episode, we will show you how to configure Grail and how to manage data access with Grail. I'm Sini from Dynatrace, from the platform enablement team, and with me I have product manager Dominic. Hi, Dominic.
Hi, Sini. Glad to be here.
You're welcome, and we will guide you through, mainly Dominic, throughout today's session. Yeah, so what are the topics we are going to cover? Basically, Dominic will explain you how data is organized in Grail. We have here a hands-on example, so we will show you actually live with real data, live data coming in, how to organize the data. And in the first part of our session, in the second part of our session, we will show you how data access and permissions can be configured actually, and also have a hands-on part on how, even a small example, and do some live configuration there. And at the end of our session, we will have a Q&A, and this is an ask for all of you guys. So if you have any kind of questions during the session, feel free to use the built-in Q&A feature in Zoom. You should see it somewhere at the bottom, but usually it's at least on our screen, it's at the bottom. So some Q&A bubble, and feel free there to ask your questions anytime. And at the end of our session, we will try and answer your questions. Yeah. Now I'm handing over to you, Dominic.
Cool. Yeah, thanks a lot, Sini, for the introduction. So I would like to start with just recapping some things that most of you know. At least if you've been using Grail, you should already have been in touch with it. So the question is, how is data organized in Grail? And there's a couple of terms that we simply want to take a quick look of. First of all, data in Grail is accessible through tables. So you know there's the logs table, which gives you access to all logs, the events table, which gives you access to all the events, and the spans table, basically. So within these tables, we then have buckets, Grail buckets. So there is one default bucket which stores logs by default. There is one for events and so on. And you also can recognize these buckets because they are prefixed with default underscore. So for those default buckets, they also have a fixed retention time, which is 35 days. And of course, there is different use cases where you will need to keep your logs for a longer time, or maybe there's also use cases where you want to store them not that long because maybe 7 days is enough. And therefore, it is also possible to create custom buckets. And here in this example, so there would be one custom bucket which stores audit logs for 180 days. And then there's another one which we called custom logs, And in this case, it would be 7 days. Now, as you see on this screen, records, so there is different records now, and each of the log records that is stored in exactly one bucket, basically. So record 1, it's exactly in the default logs bucket. Record 9 would be in the audit logs bucket, and so on. Now, if you want to get access, if you want to query the data now using DQL, what you will do on the log side, you will fetch the data from the log table. So typing a statement, fetch logs, will get you all the records that are stored in all the buckets, basically.
One question there, Dominic. Is it also possible to query only those records from a specific bucket?
Yes, so that's also an option. So for example, if you only want to query the data from the custom logs bucket, you can simply add a filter statement. So you would say fetch logs, filter DT system bucket equals custom logs. And so this is a hidden system field. So basically each record has this dt.system.bucket field, which tells you which bucket it comes from. And a very important detail here for this query is that once you specify a bucket filter, this will only execute the query in this single bucket as well. So if you know the bucket where you're searching for, you can speed up your queries, basically.
So this means the best practice is filter on the bucket as soon as possible, right after the fetch logs or fetch business events or whatever table you're querying.
Where that's possible, it's a good practice to do. Yes.
Okay.
Okay, and this is already the bare minimum. And let's now take a look and see what this looks like using notebooks. So I'm gonna jump over into an empty notebook. So we are here on a live environment and I'm logged in, and using notebooks, I can now fetch my logs. But that's not how I wanted to start. So, because what we want to know now is we want to see where, how can we query the data? So what tables are there? And therefore, there is one specific table, which is called DT system data objects, which gives you a list of all the queryable data objects. And you see, this is quite a lot here. So it's over 300 different data objects. If you take a look at the type, there's two types of it. So there's tables and there's views. And in our example, we want to take a look now on the tables to see which of them are here. And yeah, so we see we have right now the logs table, the events table, and the BIS events table. And then there is some additional system tables. So first of all, you also see the data objects table that I just queried. And then there is system events and system buckets. So system events contains audit logs from Dynatrace, so Dynatrace system audit logs. It contains query execution logs and so on. So lots of different internal details. And there is also the DT system buckets table, which will give you an overview of all the buckets that exist on the system. And this is the next one that we're going to take a look at. So let me bring up a new one and take a look at the buckets here.
You haven't clicked on run.
Yeah. Right. And let me go back again to this table view because it's easier to read. So, and I'm sorting here based on the name. So what you see is there is those default buckets, which are prefixed using default, and you see the BIS events. You see that, for example, Davis events is not stored in the default events, although it's events. So there's already a couple of out-of-the-box buckets. We also see the default logs bucket here that I mentioned before. Yeah, and a couple of other buckets as well. So for example, you also see that in the background, there's already a span bucket that exists, although it's not yet curable because that's still a feature that we are working on. Yeah, so this is basically the buckets that exist in this environment. And now speaking about logs, we're gonna take a look at the logs that we have in the system and see in which buckets they are actually stored. So I'm gonna fetch all logs now. And then take a look. And since it's hidden, it's not gonna be there. So what I need to do is I do a fields add, or just the fields, then it's maybe shorter. And we do the hidden field DT system bucket, which will show us which bucket they are stored in. And of course, what we can then do is just get an overview. So we summarize this. And we see right now, all the logs are in this default bucket.
Maybe one question to you, since this field is a bit hidden. Is there a way with auto-suggest can help you to find the system bucket field?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the thing is, if you start typing, you won't see any of the system fields. Yeah, maybe except for the sampling ratio, not sure why that's not here. But if you are certain you want to know which system fields are available, you have to go ahead and type dt.system. Which will give you all the system fields. Although in reality, so the most used one probably will be the bucket. All the others, typically you don't need them. So yeah, let's go back to the buckets here and summarize it. Right. So the question now is, let's take a look at different processes that send in data, but it's always bad if you're typing, right? So let's do it like this. No, fields add. And let's take a look at the different process names that we have. And then see into which buckets they get sent. Right, and now we see all the processes stored in default logs. And this is now what I want to show you how you can change it. Because, so we also already took a look at one of the high frequency logs here. So we say, hey, this easy trade offer service, that's a lot of logs, and we only want to keep those for 7 days instead of 30 days. So let's go ahead and set up a new bucket to store these only for 7 days, and then also configure the rule to forward these logs into this separate bucket. Okay. So what I'm now gonna do is I will copy this filter expression here into my clipboard because I'm gonna use it later in the pipeline configuration. So yeah, copying this. And now there's two things I gotta do. First, I need to create a new bucket, and then I set up the pipeline. So first of all, I go into the storage management app. And here you basically have a list of all the existing buckets, and you can create additional buckets here as well. So the important thing to know is that this app only works if you are a Dynatrace admin, because you will need the permission to create and manage buckets, basically, which, as you can imagine, can cause data loss if you're not using it right. Because, I mean, it's not about creating a bucket, but it's then about deleting buckets where you will really delete all the data that's in it, basically. So we create a new bucket. We call it custom
Office service logs.
Offer service logs, and we will just add the 7 days here as well. Yeah, you don't need a display name, but we set the retention here in days. And here you can really choose any value from between 1 day and 10 years in days, basically. So let's create this new bucket. And so this will take a short moment, which I'm just gonna wait. So you see, oh, it's there. Nice.
That was really quick now.
So that's the new bucket. And with that, we now go into the settings where we have the log pipeline configured. And so log monitoring, here we have the bucket assignment. And here I'm now, so everything, as you see, there's only the default rule which sends the logs into the default bucket. And this is where I'm now gonna add a rule. And it's the offer service again. And you could even say, hey, I don't want to store it in a bucket. So this could be useful if you're probably just calculating a metric based on a certain log, but you would then simply not store it. But in our case, we now select this, this new bucket, which is not there. Maybe I was a little too quick.
It can take maybe some time, 2 minutes or so.
So again.
Can you check if it already exists? Yep, there we have it.
We have it. So I select this new bucket here.
Yeah, we still need to wait some time.
And so that's the one thing. But then in the end, what you're gonna do is the filter expression that we used before. So basically for this matcher, you can use everything that you could be using in DQL to filter your records, basically. So let's try.
You have to reload the page, I guess.
Do I?
Yep.
One more time.
And select the bucket.
Let's. Yeah.
Now, no error.
Okay, so we add our expression here. We save it. And now this new rule will forward all the offer service logs into this new bucket.
Question, Dominic. So, will existing logs be affected from this rule?
No. So this rule starts to work exactly now.
Okay.
So whatever happened before is still where it was stored.
Okay. So this will only apply to the data being ingest since the rule will, from the point in time the rule is active.
Yes,
okay.
Exactly. And that's actually a good question. And I think we have the perfect notebook to take a look here now, because so you see, we were filtering for those easy trade offer service logs. And we also looked into which bucket they get stored. So this was before, everything in default logs. Now running this again, it should give us still all the old logs are still contained in the default logs, but now the new ones start coming into this new custom offer service logs bucket.
That was really quick about kicking in the rule, so it almost takes effect immediately.
Yeah. There's only this glitch in the settings. So yes, and this is actually the first demo that I wanted to show. So we've seen how to create a new bucket, setting up a rule to send this data into this new bucket. And with this, I think we are.
Maybe we have a question which might fit right now. There's a question about, is there a limitation on how many buckets can be created?
That's a very good question. So I think you already heard about it, probably. So there is right now a limit of 80 buckets. So yeah.
And I think this limitation is also documented in our public help.
It is, yes. Right. So yeah, and with this, so this was the first step. How is data organized? We will now jump over to the next part and take a look at how permissions work. Right. And I want to do here again a quick detour. So if you're familiar with the identity and access management UI, then you know there is people, groups, policies, and within policies you have permissions. So each user basically belongs to user groups. For each of those groups, there is policies assigned, and within a policy, you will find those permissions. So as an example, you could have your user chain admin, and she's now member in different groups, but one of them being the monitoring admin, which is an out-of-the-box group in Dynatrace. And the monitoring admin has assigned different policies. So this is an App Engine admin, App Engine user. He can use the automation engine, and he also has access to data. So the storage all Grail data read and the storage default monitoring data read. And then as an example, the storage all Grail data read policy now contains two permissions. The first one here being the allow storage buckets read, and then the second one giving access to all the tables without any condition. So basically, this user or users who have this policy can access all the data in Grail.
So that's the policy for the monitoring admin group. I guess I can also create my own custom group.
Yes. So there's a couple of default groups, and then in a real world scenario, you will then also be creating your own groups. And we will do an example later where we also have already prepared our own group to take a look at.
Nice.
Okay, so now, and what I forgot to mention, so this system, that's not just limited to storage access permissions. So there's lots of different permissions throughout Dynatrace using certain things and so on. So, but now we want to dive deeper into data access, so the storage permissions, basically. And I'm bringing back this picture of our tables and our buckets. And we'll now take a look at the different granularities of these permissions. So first of all, there is, like you've already seen, table permissions. So there's allow storage logs read, events read, and so on. And this will give you access to the full table, basically. Then there is a second layer, which is the record permissions, which comes in not as a separate permission, but as a where clause for the table permissions. So you do a allow storage logs read, and then this will basically allow you to limit access to selected records. So like you see now here highlighted in green, you'd probably just have access to record 2, 8, and 14. And this can be done based on different fields that are meant for permissions. And there's also the DT security context field, which can also be used for this. And we will see this a little later then as well. The last permission is then you can also control access on a bucket level. So for example, you could, based on bucket names, give access to only a certain bucket. Right.
So I have some questions there. To access, as you have seen here in the example logs, it's not sufficient that you have storage logs read. You also need bucket access. So if you don't have bucket access, you cannot read basically any table.
Yes, that's right. So that's right. So you need both. So just having the purple table permission will give you access to all the data that comes from buckets that you have access to. So you can read all logs from all buckets that you have access to. And normally, if you're using any of the default policies, then there is allow storage buckets read without any condition, basically. Okay. So this layer normally works automatically, but of course, in more complex scenarios, you can go ahead and change this, basically. Great. So there is, I already mentioned, there's several default policies in Grail. So all the different default policies that are for storage purposes are prefixed with storage. And basically, you can think of, there's three classes of default policies. There is, first of all, some all whatever policies. So we've seen one of them before. It's the Grail all data read policy. Then there is another one. I mean, this is the one that really gives access to everything. And then we have two other policies, which the first one would give access to all the system data. So this a user with this permission, that's again something certain administrators might need, because with that you can see all the query logs, you can see audit logs and so on. So you really can understand how your colleagues were using Grail. And then we have this storage default monitoring read, which will give you access to all the logs, metrics, events that are stored in default buckets. So with this, this is a great policy also to get started in a small environment. If you're starting to send in data and not yet have configured much, then this is a good starting point. Then there's a second type of policies, which is table specific. And so here we have one for each of the tables that exist, basically, and it gives you access to all the buckets. So also future custom buckets that you will create for BIS events, you will have access now with this one and so on. And
so basically those policy definitions, they don't have any workflows.
Exactly. And then there is also different use cases where we know they have to be treated carefully. So for example, security events is something where you really need to take a cautious decision who is allowed to see those, because this is about vulnerabilities in your software. So this is handled separately, and right now there's only the security event read, but might be future options here as well. And what's important to mention here is that all these default policies are based on bucket and table permissions, but like Sini mentioned, there is no record level permissions in those specified, which means if you use those, this will get in conflict with record level permissions. So what we're gonna show you in the demo later on. So you gotta make sure not to use those if you switch over, basically. Now, record level permissions. So the way how it works is that we have a list of supported fields, which are very often present on data, basically. And those can be used to define, those can be used in the where clause to filter records, basically. And what it means is basically, you've seen it on a previous slide as well. So you could do allow storage metrics read where the Kubernetes cluster name is a certain cluster, for example. Or another one, you could give somebody access to logs where a certain security context is set. So this list is not final. In the process where we are right now, with onboarding more and more data into the new platform, because as you know, right now there's still a big chunk of data living in second gen, running through the management zone system and everything. But yeah, right now, for example, spans is also getting shifted over, and so on. And there is, for example, from a cloud perspective, certain fields that make a lot of sense to also use for permissions. So we are now adding those to this supported list here as well.
Where can I see up to date about all the fields for record level permissions?
So this table was copied over from our online documentation. So we're gonna, yeah, I didn't add the link here, but yeah, we are keeping the doc up to date.
So I think there's a page called IAM reference, and where you will see like all the supported fields for record permissions and the whole reference about how to define those policy statements. So if you search for Dynatrace IAM reference, you will see a big reference about what you can do with our permission system with policies.
Yeah, that's right. Cool. And yeah, so, but also if the field you're looking for is not on the list, there's still possibilities, because that's where the custom field BT security context comes in. And just as a quick guideline on how to set up record level permissions, we've created a small flowchart. So first and foremost, starting, you gotta know what the detail is that you want to use for access management. So this could be something identifying your application, if there's different applications or whatever. And very often, so as mentioned before, this is already covered by the permission fields. So it could be the Kubernetes class namespace name. It could be the host group name that is very heavily used throughout the whole Dynatrace already. So that's all good guesses to get an easy start. And if that's the case, then basically all that's left to do is defining the policies and binding it to the groups. Right. So, but what if this is not the case? So then there is a good chance that this will still be part of the record. So this could be in the content of your log, for example, or it could be just another detail that's on there.
So for instance, I could parse out an application ID from a record and use this as a determinator in my security context.
Exactly. And we will see this in the demo then as well. And yeah, if that's the case, then there is one additional step you gotta take. So we've been to the pipeline before. We've been in the bucket assignment. Now, for the security context, there's also a stage available where you can configure the security context, and then you go ahead and define your policy using the security context. And of course, it could be different. And then there's always the option to enrich the record at the data source. So depending on the technology you're using to capture the logs, this could be one agent or certain extensions. There's ways how to actually control what is enriched with each of the records, basically. So on the one agent side, for example, there is the one agent control utility, which would allow you to set a host tag, and you can set the DT security context tag there. And this will then automatically be enriched with all the logs, all the spans, all the metrics, and so on that get sent off from this environment. And there will there's also then options if you're on one of the cloud platforms to also get the details into the security context as well. Right. And with this flowchart finished, let's put this into practice. So what we are now gonna do is basically we're gonna start with figuring out the detail that we want to use for access management. And I'll go back into the notebook here. And just to make it easy here, let's get rid of this. And let's take a look at the DT process name here. So this is not one of the supported fields. So yeah, it's not gonna work out of the box, but we can use this to actually set up a security context. And here we will go for this. I think that's a good one. Let's take a look at the Easy Trade Manager here. And again, I'm copying this filter expression into my clipboard now. Just
so question here. So what the use case is? So you maybe have an application team who is maintaining a component called Easy Trade Manager, and you want to give that application team access to all logs created by the Easy Trade Manager process.
Yeah, that's an example. Right. So yeah, we know what we're looking for. So I'm going back to our settings, and I'm finding log monitoring here again. So last time we were on the bucket assignment. Now we go to setting up the security context. So here I'm gonna add a rule, and this was now Easy Trade Manager. And I'm just putting this in here. So I'm filtering those logs. And in our case, I will now go with a static value for the security context. So I'm putting in this value. What you could also do is, and I hope it doesn't forget it, so you could also go for a field and copy the value over from a certain field. So you could also dynamically set this. But this one is just fine for us now. So I'm gonna save this. And again, so this is a pipeline configuration. So all the logs that have already through the pipeline before, it will not have an effect on those. So this is starting now, basically. And since there should be constantly logs coming in, yeah, that's good because we still, no, that's not, we're gonna get rid of this one because we're not looking for the buckets here. But instead, we want to see the security context here.
So you want to verify if the security context you just defined exists on records?
Yes. Oh,
I think it's underscore.
Exactly. And maybe just fields. No, let's.
So,
and we need to do this one first, right?
So what you want to, you now see, okay, how many records do have the DT security context field set, and how many don't have it set?
Yeah. So I was filtering now for those logs that qualify, and we see now there's still logs from before we set it up, and now there is the new logs all have this Easy Trade Manager setup. So that's the first thing. Going back here, we now went this path. So we went through here, we had a no, and now we did the pipeline rule. So next, what we're gonna do is set up the IAM policies, bind it to the groups, and we're done. And before we actually do this, I'm quickly gonna show you the user that we will be testing this out with. So I have here my incognito window, and in here, I'm signed in as somebody different, basically. So this is the new team member. And this one already has access to the platform as a general, but there is no access to any data. So doing the fetch logs here, you'll see no access, basically not authorized for this table, right? And so black window is incognito, is this one user. The bright window is my admin user. So I'm back here now to the bright window. And first of all, let's take a look at this Dominic Gmail, which is a member in this Easy Trade development team group. And this group basically, so yeah, the identity and access management, I forgot to show you. Just real quick, I'm going back to the notebooks. So if you click your account and you have the right permissions, you can go to account management here. That's where we then are. And here we have these people, groups, policies, basically. So we are already on the policies tab here. And here we have already this predefined policy storage access for Easy Trade development team. And taking a look at it, what did we do there? So before the meeting, we already gave it access to the to all buckets. But as you have seen, just having bucket permissions doesn't give you anything. So you need a table permission as well.
Yeah, maybe you can scroll down and then you will see to which group
right.
It's bound.
So this is bound to the Easy Trade development team group, which going over. No, I closed it. No,
that's the right
there he is. Yeah, which Dominic is a member of. And now what we're gonna do is we're gonna give this Dominic guy access to logs. So this is the storage logs read permission. And let's just see now what happens once you have it. He has this. So we're gonna save this. And now go into the dark window here and try again. Now he has access to all the logs. And now, again, just to show you, summarizing now the values for the security context. This will also give him access now to all the other logs that he shouldn't have access to. And therefore, we're gonna go back into the policies and edit it once more. And instead of just doing this unconditionally, we're gonna add a where clause and filter for DT security context. And just, I don't know how many additional contexts this guy will get access to at some point. We're gonna just add it here like this. Trade manager. Right. And hoping there is no typos, we can save this again. Going back into our incognito browser and run this query once more. And basically the null values should be gone because this guy now only has access to the logs that are contained within this security context.
So this means changes, policy, permissions changes take effect immediately.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't need to log out or refresh your window. They just kick in immediately.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
That's really nice.
Cool. Yeah, and with this now, we've been through the demo and we are ready for a Q&A.
Yeah, we have some questions. Question from an anonymous attendee. Can we delete a bucket and its content?
Yes, this is possible. So in fact, since we still almost have it open, so in the once more, this guy doesn't have the permission to do it because that's what this one has. So going back here in the storage management app, what we can do now is go ahead and just delete it. There's some security measure, so you have to at least make a cautious decision to type it again, because yeah, the data will be gone.
Thanks. Maybe next question related also to buckets. Is it possible to create custom buckets through Terraform? Or maybe let me try to rephrase, is it possible to create custom buckets through APIs?
Yes. So there is an API available for it. And there should also be the Monaco at least support for config as code.
Yeah,
monitoring
as code.
Monitoring as code, yeah.
Okay, so basically you can do it via API, and you can delete, create buckets, and delete bucket content via APIs. You can do all the bucket management also via APIs.
Yes.
Thanks. Then we have maybe a next question. Do users have access to default buckets when Grail is enabled?
This depends what group they belong to. So there is the monitoring admin group that I showed you has wide-ranging access, but for any users not in this group, you will need to set it up yourself. So, and you can pick and choose, either use the default policies or use your own.
Thanks. Maybe let's pick here the first question up from Kevin. If you have different policies applied to different buckets, what happens if a user that does not have permissions, one of the buckets does fetch logs? Is the data actually queried and hidden, or is it excluded from the query?
So I'm not 100% sure. So if users have different permissions and they execute the same query, they will see different results. So that's one thing.
So I think the question is more if there are different processes in place and you have different definitions there. How are then the permissions evaluated? So you might have some definitions in policy A and the other ones in policy B, and how is evaluation happening there? So is it are they connected, or are they all connected? Maybe that's
so
question.
Yeah, like we've seen, there's many permissions in several permissions in one policy, and a user group has several policies, and the user is then member in many groups. So basically each of those permissions will be taken on itself, and the first one matching will determine whether you have access to the data point or you don't.
Okay, we have also a question again that bucket manager through API doesn't seem to work. I tried it myself a couple of times. It worked without any flaws. So if you have any questions or why it's not working, feel free to reach out to our Dynatrace One team via the in-product chat.
So one typical issue there might be that you don't have the permission to actually do it, because that's a permission that's, as far as I know, not assigned out of the box to any group.
Yeah. Other questions? I think this one was a permission question. Can we define policies per record and bucket name? So a certain log type from a bucket?
We are working on that. So right now, you could, so what you're gonna need there is you're gonna need to set up a policy that also, a table permission that also filters on a bucket name. And that's something right now, as far as I know, it does not work, but that's already scheduled to be added.
But if the user only needs to see like one bucket and only its log records, then it shouldn't be any issue.
Then it works already. So you can do the bucket permission filter for the name. And
exactly.
Yeah.
Next questions. What is the best practice for environments with hundreds of app teams? For example, create buckets based on retention period and then give them a read-only access in the buckets for their app service.
So what we are suggesting is to not use bucket permissions, but focus on the record level permissions basically, and just handle it on that layer. So I think the important thing is, if you're looking at a large environment and you have hundreds of apps and teams, it's important to know upfront from the beginning what the details are that you will be using to base your permissions on, basically, and make sure you have this information everywhere.
But the best practice is to use buckets just for defining retention.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, we have a question about is there a character limit on how many characters are allowed in a log line in Grail? Maybe I'll try to answer that one.
Thanks. I don't know that.
So there might be a character limit which is pretty high, and we have increased it recently. I cannot tell you the exact limit, but what's happening there, what I have observed, if you hit this really big character limit, then we just add a line break. So nothing is being deleted or cut off. There's just a line break in your log line. Yeah, maybe let's try and answer that question. So is there a reason why metrics are not included in the table objects table?
So the reason why it's not there is because you cannot fetch metrics from the metrics table. So although permissions, so technically there is a table behind it, but if you're working with metrics, you're gonna use the time series command, which makes it way easier to use. And in fact, right now you cannot fetch single metric records.
Yeah, we have some other questions about the best practices when it comes to bucket management. I hope we have answered those ones. Done. And maybe last question for today, since there are no more, can we move the logs to a bucket after it's ingested?
Yes, that's something that comes up quite often. Right now, you cannot move data that's already stored in the bucket.
So you need to be cautious
Yes.
into which buckets you put the data in, but you can delete. I mean, if you make maybe a mistake on ingestion, you can potentially delete the whole bucket. Maybe some best practices we have figured out, or I've been also working on. So when you set up bucket assignments, when you do bucket assignments, usually I send the buckets to my default logs bucket there, which is the catch all bucket. And in that bucket, if I see that my data is sanitized, that I see there's no critical data in, then I change it to the proper bucket. So just to avoid, having maybe some not sanitized data, log data in Grail. So I usually, put it in some default logs bucket, which is the catch-all filter, and which is, let's say, just for some temporarily catch-all data where I don't mind if I drop the whole bucket. Yeah, that was the last question. Since there are no more additional questions, maybe one last one. Can I export the bucket logs yeah, with accessing the API, you can query any kind of data. You can export any kind of data which is stored in Grail. So if you want to export any kind of data, feel free to do so. We are not putting there any limits in. Okay, so let's wrap up the session. So thank you everybody for watching and for asking quite some questions. We will keep with this kind of format when it comes to Dynatrace Office Hours. So next month we'll have also some plans, and stay tuned for the upcoming session. And many thanks, Dominic, to you taking your time and explaining us about how Grail management and permissions work.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And yeah.
And thanks everyone for watching. And we will put this, we will make this recording available to every one of you and send it out via email. Thanks and have a nice day.
Bye-bye.
Bye.